present to your, we're recording this in case you all need it later, if you heard that. So welcome to CANS and service planning training on this Friday afternoon. We are glad you're here. I'm gonna, even though I like seeing all your faces, I'm gonna move you to the other screen because then I can't see the slides.
I know, I can't see everybody.
But welcome. We're glad you're here on this Friday afternoon. In Monday, I think I sent to Crystal the slides and some handouts. So hopefully you have received those. If you didn't, she can make sure that you get them after the fact so that you have them as resources and references going forward. Hopefully, I'm sure by now this is not your first Zoom, but you came in with muted, and that way we don't get all the background noise. We will have some polls to use throughout the training to sort of keep folks engaged. Please use the chat to send questions, comments. When we're doing specifically the CANS piece, Carol has some scenarios, and so we'll use the chat to respond to those. And so I'm going to try to advance my slides. I am Anna Antel, and I'm a program consultant here at the Office of Children's Services. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Before coming to OCS, I worked at the local level at a CSB. I sat on FAPT. I have previously worked in the private provider world. So I bring the sort of the clinical lens to our program consultant team. Since I've been at OCS, I've been here for 8 years. I have been the sort of primary cheerleader, trainer, sort of all things wraparound for Virginia. I do state-sponsored utilization review along with the general technical assistance duties. And so those are sort of the hats that I bring to you wearing today when I take on the service planning part of the training. I am going to have my coworker Carol introduce herself, and she will kick off the first section of training this afternoon, not this morning. We're not going back in time.
No. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it's a Friday afternoon and it's nice outside, so you really do need to be commended for being here. So I hope we can make this move along and you can learn something that you didn't know before about CANS and service planning. My background is primarily social services, although I've been here at OCS for so many years, I don't even want to say how many. So I really have been involved with CSA for quite a while and worked on CANS for most of that time. So that's why I'm doing the CANS training. I guess we can go ahead and get started, Anna. Okay. Just a quick outline. We've done our introduction. We're going to talk some about the purpose of CANS. Why do we have CANS and CSA? I know some of you may be DSS staff who are doing in-home cases that now do CANS every 90 days. So we will talk some about the DSS version of the CANS too. To talk about accurately rating the CANS. In a minute, we're going to do polls to find out where you are as far as your level of experience with the CANS. So I can kind of gear the presentation to that. And then Anna will pick up with the service planning framework and using the CANS to build a plan. Okay, our first poll. Okay, it looks a little different. We're used to doing this on WebEx, and this is our first time on Zoom, so it looks a little different. Okay, so answer yes or no. Are you currently certified in rating the CANS for CSA purposes? Now, just CSA, not if you're DSS. If you're DSS and you're rating it for CSA purposes, like to go to FAPT, then click yes. Or if you are DJJ or CSB and you do the CANS for CSA or schools.
going to give folks just a couple more seconds here. We're so close. Having everyone answer. Y'all are awesome. All right, I'm going to count us down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes, okay, 68 to 32. Okay, that's good. Okay, so some of it may be a little bit of a refresher for you, but that also means I can probably skip some of the most basic stuff when we're talking. So good to know. And I think we have one more poll. This one is, how long have you administered the cans? 1 year or less, 2 to 4 years, 5 to 8 years, or more than 8 years? To give us an idea of your level of experience. And this could be if you're administering the cans for any reason, for DSS only or for CSA.
Give us a couple more seconds here to give everyone a chance. All right, I'm going to count us down, Carol, at 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me.
Okay, so we got 41% at a year or less, 26 at 2 to 4, 5 to 8, 13%, and more than 8, 20%. Wow. So there are some of you that are really should be pretty experienced on the cans. So there may be some things that are a little bit different. I do want to talk some about how we're trying to kind of merge doing the cans for DSS with the cans for CSA. So that's a little different. A couple of other things that will be new. But it does look like we've got a pretty substantial number 41% who have not really been doing the cans for very long. So that's good to know too. Okay, let's move along. Okay, so why do we do assessments? Effective use of the cans. Okay, why we're here today. The Code of Virginia requires FAP to assess strengths and needs and who are approved for referral to the FAPT, and then to develop an individual family services plan, an IFSP. So that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're talking about that statutorily required assessment and then the development of a services plan for children and youth and families who are referred to FAPT and CSA. Okay, so why even do that though? Why even have an assessment? Why does the code require an assessment? Why does it require it for all kids served by CSA? It's the mandatory uniform assessment instrument is how it's referred to in the Code of Virginia. And way back, I think in 2008, the State Executive Council, which is the oversight body for CSA, adopted the CANs as to be used as that assessment. So those are just some places where you can find the requirement in the code. I think it's significant that it's not mentioned just once, it's mentioned repeatedly. So it clearly was, people have deemed it important over time that we have a required uniform assessment instrument. So what are the primary purposes we zeroed in on for CANs for the MUI, as the mandatory uniform assessment instrument is sometimes referred to? Okay, use it as a foundation in service planning. That's by and large the most important as far as what we're talking about today, but also the most important as far as your work. That's what you are going to use the CANs for or have been using the CANs for. It's an assessment to build your basis for your service plan and to evaluate your service plan. Secondly, to measure outcomes. We use CANs data to measure some outcomes on the OCS website. You can look those up sometimes, but also there are reports in Canvas you can use to look at a child's progress over time and a caregiver's progress over time. And then lastly, there was an an interest in assessing the level of need for a child to determine the appropriate services. We don't really focus on using the CANs in that way so much because that was sort of an early motivator for having a uniform assessment instrument, because children were being placed in residential treatment that didn't really need that level of treatment. So there was interest in having something that would recommend residential based on the child's needs, which is why we have the algorithm and the recommendation. But we really do not focus on that in our use of CANs. That sort of subsided as something that people were really interested in looking at. So the first two are most important. Okay, generally speaking, why do we do assessments when working with children and families? And it helps me to think about assessments as falling into different categories that we work with. We've got specific purpose assessments where you're gathering information, but you're doing it for a purpose, like the VMAT, the Virginia Enhanced Maintenance Assessment Tool. That's determining how the child's need for the foster child's need for additional daily supervision. That's what it's measuring. And then it's going to assign a dollar amount to that for the foster parent to receive to provide that enhanced supervision. YASI is a tool that juvenile justice uses to look at the child in the community, at the possibility of recidivism, of committing another crime. SDM, those of you in DSS recognize that, structured decision making. You're looking at whether or not abuse or neglect might occur again. So those are very specific. They have a definite purpose. You are trying to ascertain a specific piece of information. So it's narrowing the focus on those issues, and then it's making a decision. But then you also have we'll go to the next slide. Seems like it's a little slow. Yeah, broad functional assessments, which is like the CANs. So you're gathering information across multiple life domains. And you're learning as much as you can about the child and family. And you're doing it because you want to identify those needs that led to the current situation. And you want to identify strengths so that they can either be used to help the family achieve self-sufficiency. They can be used to promote just healthy functioning for a child. So you look at both the needs and the strengths after you've gathered all this information. You gather all the information, and then you can rule out what's not needed, what is needed. You prioritize your strengths and needs, and you do that by looking at your 2s and 3s on the CANs. Those areas of need that are 2s and 3s, and your areas of strengths that need building are 2s and 3s. So then you're going to create your service plan based on that, your goals and your objectives and your strategies. Okay, this is just a slide to say you can't have a plan without an assessment. Where would you even start? You can't just sit down and think, okay, well, I know this about the family, so maybe this would help. But no, you've got to do that assessment. You've got to look at the information. You've got to identify what's needed. Okay, CANS is a communimetric. Sometimes people try to look at other assessment instruments that are more used in a more of a clinical fashion. We use CANS for service planning. It's not a psychometric tool. We're not trying to diagnose anyone. We're looking at something for service planning and progress over time. So sometimes people say, well, CANS is subjective because it's based on the individual's perception. There is some truth to that. But what balances it is you have a consistent rating logic. The anchors 1, 0, 1, 2, and 3 always mean the same thing. You also have very specific item and anchor definitions. So if you're not familiar with the manuals, that item and rating definitions manuals for each version of the CANs, you really should do that, because sometimes it tells you exactly what to rate by the wording. If you do the interview mode in Canvas, you will get some of that, most of it, but there's a lot of information in those manuals that gives you tips and additional information that can help you decide what's the right rating. CANS ratings are based on observations at a point in time. So you're just zeroing in kind of a snapshot, what's happening right now. It's about the what, not the why. And what that means is you're not assigning a reason for something happening. You're not trying to figure out what happened that made, why this happened, whose fault is it? It helps kind of remove the stigma, because you're just describing what's going on. You're not attributing it to anyone or anything. So sometimes that helps with families, because it's easy for them to feel at fault, like they're doing something wrong. And it's also not about what's easiest for the system. What that means is you're not rating a certain way because if you rate this way, you're going to get X amount of funding, or if you rate this way, Medicaid will pay. We had that come up at one of the very first CANS super user trainings we did. That was so far back, we still had the paper cans, and one of the people in the training waved a piece of the score sheet and said, "Just tell me how to rate this so Medicaid will pay." And that's not what we wanted. That's what the previous assessment did. It arrived at a total score, and then Medicaid would determine whether or not it could, like TFC case management, it would pay. Now, of course, Medicaid would argue that no, they looked at all of the information, not just the assessment. But I mean, I saw a denial that said the score was not high enough to meet the need. So I think we wanted to get away from trying to rate an assessment to assure funding for something. You do have to do a CANS for CSA, but you're not having to do a CANS to make sure you can get a specific service under CSA or under Medicaid. You want to rate the assessment as honestly as possible. And this is just an example of another communiometric tool, the APGAR scoring system, which if you've had children, then you might be familiar with this. It's something that a nurse does when a child is born. They assign a point to those different things that the child is doing, the activity, pulse, and then those numbers help determine how healthy the child is, or if there's anything that needs to be done. So that's just another example of a communiometric tool. Okay, CANS is based on what Dr. Lyons calls the shared vision of children and families. And the whole purpose of developing it the way it was developed was to enhance communication. Agencies tend to have their own acronyms, we have acronyms in CSA, but there are also acronyms in DJJ, in the schools, in DSS, and CSB. So sometimes people from one agency might not even understand what someone from another agency is talking about, much less the parents who are sitting there hearing all this terminology. So what the CANS does is try to break it down into more everyday language that is easily communicated across, no matter what your background or experience or what agency you're working for. And now you have to be careful with that, because there's some items that you might assume mean something when really they have a very specific definition, like physical health, for example. It's not referring to the child's overall medical health. It's referring to whether or not that child has any physical limitations because of their health. The medical one is more about whether or not the child is sick or has some illness. So you have to really know what those items are referring to. But generally speaking, sleep, things like that are pretty easy to understand. You also have an easy to understand rating logic, 0, 1, 2, and 3, which for the needs, 0 is no evidence, 1 is mild, or maybe a history of the need, 2 means that action needs to be taken and there's a severe level of the need or significant, and 3 means something needs to be done right now because the need is so significant. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about this in particular because I think it's so important. CSA, the assessment is not intended to be like something you have to do for FAPT. It's not paperwork. It should be reflective of your work. And I'll veer off a little here because it's related. When DSS recently started doing the CANS for the in-home cases, I was hearing, well, it's taking 2 hours to get the CANS done. And I would think, how can that be? I mean, why would it take 2 hours to do the CANS? I mean, you should be able to do it in 20, 30 minutes. And that would be 30 minutes would be if you weren't familiar with the assessment. But then I realized people were literally trying to find the answer to every single item when they first did the first cans. They might be talking to the parents, interviewing the parents. They might be looking all through the record. They might, they were searching for that information. That's not how you use the cans. The cans is helping you. It's integrated with your work. When you first start working with the family, you probably don't know very much about them. And your cans will reflect that. It will reflect what you know, what you've learned. And you'll see as time goes on, that second cans, you'll see that you've identified other needs or things have come up that weren't discussed before. And so it's reflecting where you are working with the family. And so you don't need to worry about trying to basically fill in all the blanks when you're doing a CANS. If you don't know or there's no evidence of a need, it's a 0. If there's no evidence and you don't know anything about a strength, it's a 3. So you can always do that. That gets people into trouble on the training too, because on the training, if something is not mentioned when you're rating a vignette for certification, if something is not mentioned, it's a 0. And so sometimes that people think, why do I have so many 0s? And it's because it wasn't mentioned in the vignette. And that makes people uncomfortable. They think, well, I should at least rate a 1. No, you have to rate with the vignette, you're rating what's on the paper. In real life, you're rating what you know about the child and family. Now, that doesn't mean you can just not learn about the child and family, because that's not what your work is. Your work is to develop a relationship and find out as much information as you can about the family in order to help them get started on resolving their issues. You can also use the CANs to evaluate success and progress, which is helpful for a family. And I will talk some more about that. One other thing while we're talking about that, some people interview the family, and Dr. Lyons over time has said that he really doesn't think that's the best way to do the CANs. It really is better to just interact naturally with the family and gain that information. You could ask them some things, of course, but some of those things you're going to be asking them anyway. So you don't have to have a formal interview when you're doing the CANs. So just think of it as something that's a part of your work, that you're documenting the information that you have. You are continually learning. You know that's going to show in the CANs, and it will also show that the family's contributing more information as time goes on. Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a little about the importance of accurately rating the CANs, or how to rate the CANs. Since there are quite a few of you that have done the CANs for a while, I may kind of go over this quickly, but there are some that don't have that background. So we'll just do the best we can. It's hit the middle road somewhere. Okay, if you've done the CANs, you're very familiar with the item and rating definitions. Well, they're anchor definitions, I'm sorry. The 0, no evidence of need. What people tend to forget is there is a corresponding action level for each of those ratings. So if there's no evidence of a need, obviously you don't need to do anything. If there's a mild level or history of the need, then you need to monitor or pay attention, maybe put in something preventive. 2 requires action, and 3 requires immediate or intensive action. And those 2s and 3s are really important, because that's what you're going to be working with on your service plan. That's what you've identified as the priority. And so you really want to make sure that you address those. Sometimes people get overwhelmed because they'll say, well, I have a lot of 2s. People are really hesitant to rate 3s. I'm not sure why, but sometimes they do, but I see a lot of 2s. And I think that, which is fine if that's accurate, but then you have so many 2s, you don't know how to prioritize them on your service plan. So what you need to do is sort of group them in areas that are related, like the behavioral emotional needs, anxiety and depression might be related. You could look at other, the caregiver, maybe finances is related to housing and transportation. So you can kind of link them together in that way. Okay. I think the next one is strengths. Looking at rating strengths. There we go. And 0 means this is great. You've got this centerpiece strength. You've got something that is really workable for the family, that they enjoy, that they're good at, that maybe the child enjoys or is good at. One, you've got a useful strength. Two, you've identified a strength in this area, but three, there's no strength identified. And again, you've got those action levels. So if it's a centerpiece strength, it's central to your planning. You're going to use that in your service plan. Same with a one, it's going to be useful. A two, if you want to build that strength, you can put it in the service plan. And a three, you may want to identify a strength. So you can use strengths in more than one way, and Anna will talk about that too, but you can use strengths to directly address meeting a need, or you can use them just to support healthy overall functioning. If a person is good at something and does well, that's going to enhance their self-esteem and their functioning. Okay. Where people sometimes get confused, especially on testing, is the zero is the goal for both strengths and needs. Remember, you always want the numbers to be lower. Zero means no evidence of a need, and zero means a centerpiece strength. So when you're rating needs, no evidence is good. When you're rating strengths, centerpiece is good. Those are the best. And then it goes from there. You can then rate. So a three is no evidence of a strength because that's the quote worst. And a three is no evidence of a need because that's a severe need and you need to do something about it. So it's just important. The only place that's a real issue is on the child strengths resiliency domain. It's not really an issue in the caregiver strengths and needs because you rate those like needs. Okay, so just remember, the lower the rating, the better the child is doing or the caregiver is doing. Those numbers coming down are what you want. Okay, I want to talk about the caregiver too, particularly because sometimes people don't realize who this is supposed to be rating. One thing to remember is that agencies or case managers are never the caregiver. It's got to be an individual person that is a part of the child's life, that has been in a caregiving role, that may be in a caregiving role. But so you really need to look at caregivers like who the child is living with. For your in-home cases, that's likely to be who you're looking at. If the child has been removed and placed in foster care, then you're going to be rating the people the child was removed from. And if the plan is to reunite, then you're going to be assessing the caregiver strengths and needs to look at, well, are things going well enough to reunite? Does the CANs reflect that these needs have decreased? And we can look at safely returning the child home. Or is it the opposite? Rating mom or dad, it's still, a lot of needs. So CAN supports your decision not to return the child home. You're also going to rate relatives or others who are potential placement resources. So now with DSS, you can rate up to 3 caregivers. And typically those are the ones that worry about potential placement resources. So you're doing concurrent planning, you're looking at returning the child home, but that might not work out. So you're also at the same time considering a grandmother or an aunt for the child. Maybe they can go live there. So you rate those caregivers. It's really important to think in those terms. Think it's not who the child necessarily is currently living with, but it could be a potential placement resource, or it could be who the child used to live with and you're trying to reunite them. We don't rate foster parents on the CANs. We used to have a foster parent module, but it really didn't serve a purpose. The only time really rating a foster parent as a caregiver is if you have a child in a pre-adoptive placement. And that's because the goal is for them to be the child's permanent caregiver. So you're looking at who is the planned permanent caregiver. And that may be more than one person if you're doing concurrent planning. So look at it that way. If the foster parent this is a pre-adoptive placement, a resource home that's been approved for adoption, then you're going to rate those foster parents. But otherwise, you don't rate foster parents. Another area that people ask about is older youth for whom there is no planned permanent caregiver. we used to have an NA in the caregiver strengths and needs domain on the first iteration we had of Canvas, because there were older youth who were, at that time, independent living was the goal. And so they really didn't have anyone to rate. The other exception was, and this is still true, kids who parental rights have been terminated, but there's no one identified as the adoptive parent or the pre-adoptive parent. So those two groups really didn't have anyone to rate. Unfortunately, people could rate NA just to get through the module, so through the domain. So with Canvas 2.0, that was removed. So you have to rate a caregiver, even for those older kids. And now we have fostering futures. So you do have older youth again who really don't have a planned permanent caregiver. If there is anyone that you can see in that role, you would rate them for that youth, that older youth. What you can do is rate the youth as their own caregiver, and the items all apply. I mean, it's things like how knowledgeable is the child about their own needs? How well can they self-supervise? Do they know, I've got to work tomorrow, so I can't stay out all night. Do they have housing? Do they have a car? All of those things you can rate the youth, and you would just put the youth's name as the caregiver. You can't rate the child welfare module, which if you're DSS, you're always going to be rating that. You wouldn't rate the youth on that. You would just put all zeros. And 0 is the default for needs, and 3 is the default for strengths. Okay, what's really important to remember is that you're rating the caregiver assessment of the overall CANs on how that need, that item, affects that caregiver's ability to care for that child. So especially like with the new DSS in-home cases, sometimes we'll have a mom who has a large sibling group, 4 or 5 kids or more. And the rater is saying, well, the same things are always true for mom. She has the same housing, she has the same transportation, childcare issues. But when you really look at each individual child, they're not the same. Her lack of transportation may not affect, if you're living in a city, may not affect a 17-year-old's ability to get around town, but it could very much affect a 3-year-old who has chronic health problems, or chronic mental health problems, although at 3, that would be kind of unusual, but that she has to be able to get to the doctor or get to a hospital. So it really does depend on that individual child's needs and how they relate, the caregiver relates to that child. So you've got to look at the item from the caregiver's point of view for that individual child. And that really does, you do start to see that caregivers don't necessarily respond to children in the same way. Do they discipline one child very successfully, but not another? Those are the kinds of things that start to emerge. Okay.
Carol, could you repeat the default scoring for folks?
Yes, 0 for needs and 3 for strengths, no evidence. Yeah, so you just rate the 0. So if you're rating a CANS early on and you don't have a lot of information about the family, you may have a lot of zeros because you don't know. And again, that doesn't mean you don't try to find these out as you're working with the family, but you don't have to have them at the beginning to complete a CANS. Okay. Okay, there are 2 charts these are actually on the CANS training site, which are really a simple way to help you determine a rating for needs. Starting out with that question, you go, is there an evidence, suspicion, or history of a need in this area? Answer is no, you rate a 0. If it's yes, then you look at, is it interfering with the child's functioning? Or how would you will you take action? If you're not sure, it's going to be a 1. If you are going to take action, it's going to be 2. You need to take action, maybe not right away, but you're planning to put something in place to address that need. And then a 3 is going to be if you have to take immediate action. And don't be afraid of rating items a 3. I think people are sometimes afraid because they think if I write a 3 and we can't get services in place right away, that's a problem. as long as you're making the good faith effort to try to get services in place, that should not be a problem. You really need to honestly rate the assessment. The next page is a similar flow chart for strengths. Okay, and the same thing, evidence of a strength, 0, except now if there's no evidence of a strength, you're rating it a 3. And then you can talk about whether or not this is an area the child has any interest in, but that's up to you. Maybe, is it something that's useful? Then you could rate it as a 2 for an identified strength, and determine whether or not it's something that you want to use right now with this child. If it's definitely yes, a 3, definitely a yes, is it something you're going to use in planning? And you say, yeah, wow, we really think this is going to be helpful. We're going to rate a 1. But I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting that backwards. If you think this is going to be helpful and useful, it's a 1. If you really think it's something that's powerful, that can help this child and family, and then you want to rate it a 0. It's interesting because on the strength scale, Dr. Lyons has said that research shows that community life and the spiritual religious items are the most important indicators for successful functioning. And when you think about it, it makes sense because kids want to belong somewhere. They want to belong with somebody or to somebody. They want to feel like they have a purpose. And so those are good ones to look at, to think about when you're looking at strengths and if the child has community ties. And that can be something as simple as the family has a rural area, the family's lived in the community a long time. Everybody knows who the child is. They know their family. They feel like they belong there. Or it could be they belong with the church, or, they feel like they belong to somebody or someone, a group of people, or they have the belief that they are here for a purpose, that their life is not meaningless. So that's interesting when you look at each of the items. There's interesting stuff about all of them, but those 2 are the best indicators for improved functioning. Okay, this is really important, and Anna's heard this more times than she can probably count. Those manuals I mentioned, they're on the CANS training site. I don't think they use the same title we do. I don't think they call them items and rating. I think they just call it the manual. But it gives you a lot of background information about the 6 key principles. It, leads you to timeframes, because people think, everything on the CANS is the last 30 days, and that's not true. Items have different timeframes. So you can find that. I still use that manual when I take the test online. Sometimes, especially because sometimes the wording in the vignette mirrors the language in the manual. And so you go, oh, wait, I know this is the right answer because it's the same wording. So keep that in mind. Do we have the handouts, Anna, like we did on the WebEx, or not?
They were emailed to Crystal, and
okay,
she sent them
so
out to everybody.
we sent one. I think we sent the DSS 5 to 21 version, because that basically has everything for the 5 to 21. The standard is embedded in that. It just has extra stuff for DSS. Of course, there's also the birth to 4 for the standard version and the DSS version. All of those are in the Canvas site. They're in the documents folder, and they're on our website at the link you see there in the CANS folder. Okay, let's see. All right, foundations of rating, 6 key principles. This is important because sometimes I think people kind of forget about them. Dr. Lyons does talk about them in the online training, but I think people tend to get fixated on the actual item numbers, and they forget they're supposed to be considering these 6 key principles before they even select the rating. So we'll look at what those are and talk about a little bit about some of them. These are the 6. I'm not going to read them to you because we'll go through them, but this information is in different resources that we've put out or that we have on our website or on the Canvas website. That documents folder has a lot of information in it. So you can go ahead on and we'll talk about a couple of them and then get to the three. One thing is that if an item is on the cans, it's there for a reason. You can use it in service planning. All of the items have some meaning. You're rating the youth and the child or the caregiver within the context of their culture and development. So, and that's really just always in the back of your mind. That's something you need to be thinking about. In this family's culture, how is this behavior? What's the expected behavior? Is that okay? You know, you have to be mindful of not imposing your values and what you think is the right way to do things. You know, there's more than one right way to do things, and people have to remember that when they're working with children and families. So keep in the back of your mind, this culture is different than mine. And so maybe it's okay. Maybe it looks to me like I have, you know, the supervision of this child is haphazard. How do they know who has the child at what time? But they know, they have it worked out and they know. So it's things like that you just have to really pay attention to. Or even how family members relate to each other could be very different than what you're accustomed to. You also need to look at development, because like in that first example, a toddler throwing a temper tantrum is appropriate, 16-year-old no. So you're going to rate that differently depending on the child's developmental stage. Okay. This last one I've touched on, you're not assigning a cause to an item or a need. You know, you're thinking about the what, not the why. There are two items, though, that do have the cause and effect thinking. One is adjustment to trauma, because you're making an assumption that the trauma that occurred in the past is affecting behavior today. And the other one is the intentional misbehavior item in the child risk domain. Intentional misbehavior is that item that means the child is acting obnoxious. They're trying to get adults' attention, but it really has nothing to do with the need they have. They just know that something's wrong. And so they're trying to get your attention. So they're doing all sorts of things that adults would find obnoxious and difficult to handle. But it really maybe has nothing to do with what the actual real need is. It's very interesting to me because on the behavioral emotional needs domain, people are pretty good about rating those. You know, we see anger control being rated a 2 or 3. We see depression, anxiety, you know, hyperactivity, all of these, you know, rated. When we get to the child risk behaviors, the only one that's consistently rated of the ones I've seen, you know, higher than even a 1, usually intentional misbehavior is a 2, at least a 2. So, but people do underrate those child risk behaviors. So that's something else to keep in mind and think about if you're doing that, why you might be doing that. And what you can do to maybe rate that better than you have been doing. Okay. These three, though, are really important. And they're all kind of interrelated. The 30-day time frame can be overridden if there's a need for action. Action levels correspond to each rating, and you're rating the child, not the child in services. The 30-day time frame, sometimes people get really literal about the 30-day time frame, and they will just say, well, that happened outside of 30 days ago. I can't consider it. The purpose of the 30-day time frame is to help people focus on what's happening now. Dr. Lyons has pointed out that, you know, whenever he sat down to read a case record, they always started with the really horrible thing that had happened that had brought the child into foster care or had brought the child to the attention of the system, and kind of dredged that all back up. And why? You can't really do anything about that now. You can do something about what the child is doing now. The symptoms, maybe they're related to that old trauma, but, you know, maybe or not doesn't really matter. What you're really focusing on is the child's needs today and the behaviors today. Or the caregiver's needs. So you really, that's the intent of the 30 days. It's not to box you into a limited time frame. A couple of things with that, like I said, not all of the items on the cans fit that 30-day time frame. So it's really important to look at that. It's in Canvas in the interview mode, but again, there's more information in those manuals that can tell you, like, for the some of the trauma items, you're going to rate in the at the historical level over the child's entire life. But the other thing is, you always, if there's a need for action, you're going to override that 30-day time frame. If something happened 3 months ago, but it's still affecting the child's behavior today, and you need to do something about it, you're going to rate at least a 2. So keep that in mind. Action levels trump the level of severity when you're trying to make a decision. So if it's a 1 or a 2, and you're thinking about, think about whether or not you're going to do something about it. Is there some intervention you think should be put in place? And if you are, then it's going to be at least a 2. Okay, so we kind of talked about that. It's not just the severity of need, but the appropriate action to be taken. So if you need to do something, rate a 2 or a 3. Okay, rating the child, not the child in services. When we first started doing CANs, and we had the algorithm, that's the recommendation that's generated about whether not the child meets the profile for residential services. And really what that's looking at is it's looking at the assessment items, the ratings on some assessment items, and saying, if the child has these ratings, then residential treatment will likely be helpful for them. So children with a similar profile did benefit from residential. That's basically what it's saying. But what happened was, I kept hearing, I'm not getting that recommendation, and this child has all these needs, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're hitting people, they're assaulting staff, they're very much having issues with behaviors. And so I asked people to just like a brief paragraph about what those behaviors were. And I'm pretty sure Newport News, I think you all did that. I had some come from Newport News. And then I would look the child's CANs up, and they were so different. There might be a description of this child losing their temper and physically hitting a staff member in a residential program, but then anger control was rated a 1. And, things like that. So it really was, the discrepancy was really obvious. And I realized what was happening, at least in part, was when the child went into residential and their behavior started to improve at all, people were dropping items to a 1 because they wanted to show that there was improvement. Well, he's not as aggressive as he used to be, and he's actually doing much better in this area, so we can drop it to a 1. Well, you really can't. As long as the child still needs that treatment, that intervention, you need to keep it at least a 2. If you drop things to 1, it means the child really doesn't need to be in residential. You're saying that everything has been identified, has been addressed, and it's now either mild or there's a history. So you really want to look at, is this something that the child is still in treatment for? And rated a 2 or even a 3. It's hard to rate the child when they're in a residential program because there is that artificial structure, or if they're getting any service, like they're on medication, it's affecting them. That's the whole point. So you have to think about, what would their behavior be like if I put them back in the community today? And you're going to have to kind of speculate and think, what I see about how they're behaving, would that translate back to the community? They are doing better in the structured environment, but if I take them out of the structured environment and put them back home, have they internalized enough of the treatment that they will be able to maintain whatever, not whatever behavior they were displaying, they won't display. So it really is down to whether or not the child has actually benefited from the treatment in that area. So think in terms of, the reasons the child was placed in residential, are those still happening? And if they are, then you're going to have to rate them as if they are. So, and the same again is true for, medication. If a child's on medication, you're going to have, like for depression, you're going to rate at least a 2 because that is an intervention that's in place. Okay. Next slide. Okay, this is just sort of a graphic to help you think about everything you should think about when you're choosing a rating. The 6 key principles are down at the bottom, so you need to keep those in mind. You look at those item and rating definitions and see exactly what they are, and then you can use those flow charts too. Now, that's not saying every time you have to go through this process for each one, but if you get those 6 key principles in your mind, then you won't have to refer back to anything. You'll just think about, oh, well, I need to remember that I can override, the 30-day time frame if we need to do something. And then, some of the item definitions are very specific. You want to make sure that you're not just assuming you know what that item means. That is one thing that's deceptive about the cans, is that because it's everyday language, people assume that it means what they think it means, and it doesn't necessarily. Another example of that is optimism, which most people think that's somebody with a positive attitude who's generally happy. Cans optimism means the child has a plan for the future. They have something they're looking forward to. And you can see that sometimes in the vignette, because they'll make a point of saying, when you're rating for certification, they'll make a point of saying something about the child wants to be a teacher or a firefighter, and more about that. And then those flow charts, which I think are really helpful when you just get down to brass tacks as to knowing what to do. Okay, I'm going to run out of time here pretty soon. Okay, we do have some scenarios, and I want to do at least a couple of them, especially now that we have Zoom and we can get some feedback from you. Not with WebEx, it was impossible really to do. So the first one is Jaden. Child in residential. First, his behavior, aggressive behavior, it's diminished, but he still angers easily and can't calm down on his own. Grabs and pushed staff and threatens them if they come near him when he's angry. So we want to look at anger control, oppositional, and danger to others. And if you had the manual with you, or you can look it up online actually, you could see what those definitions are. And I have them here, so I can actually read them to you when we're talking about it. But go ahead, and on anger control, what do you think he would rate? 0, 1, 2, 3. Anna, can we do like hands raised, or
They can
is
put
that
them in the
possible?
chat.
Put it in the chat. Yes, put it in the chat. So do you think, what rating do you think anger control would be? Somebody has to be brave and be first. Oh, no, maybe we've lost them all. Come on. All right, I'll do the first one, but then you all are going to have to jump in.
Hold on, Carol, they're coming in. Hold on.
Okay, good.
Give them
Okay,
a moment. Give
great.
them a moment.
Yeah, there does seem to be like a little bit of a delay.
And some of them are coming directly to me. Maybe they don't want everyone to know their rating. I won't call you out, people. Don't worry. We'll embrace the high-fi spirit. No shaming and blaming around here this afternoon. Okay, so Carol, bunch of, I would say, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 threes and 1, 2, 3, 6. About equal split between a 2 and a 3.
That's really good. The best answer is 3, because it's severe anger control problems. Child's temper is likely associated with fighting that is often physical. But a 2, you can make an argument for a 2, but it's moderate anger control problems. Child's temper has gotten him in significant trouble with peers, family, and school, may be associated with physical violence. That's the problem with using a 2, because he clearly is demonstrating physical violence. So the very best answer is 3. And if you were being tested, rated online, it would be a 3. If you put a 2, and this is something that's interesting about scoring the cans, the vignettes, when you're doing a certification exam, you can make a fair number of 1-point errors. Like maybe it was supposed to be a 3 and you put a 2. You can make a lot of those types of errors, or it was maybe supposed to be a 1 and you put a 0. You can do that and still pass. But what you cannot do is make 3-point errors. You can't, if it's supposed to be a 3 and you put a 0, I think only I think all you have to do is do that once and you will not pass. So just keep that in mind. 1 point off, it's not going to take that much away from your score. but 2 is going to take more, 2 points difference, and 3 is really bad. So just a little training tip there. Okay, oppositional. What would we rate him on oppositional behavior?
And I think you can all post to everyone now. So go ahead and put them in the chat.
Oh, there we go. Oh, somebody's having difficulties. Oh, it says you can't post to all. Oh, there it is. Okay. It did just have you. Okay. Great. No, we can't. 3, 2, 2. Lots of 2s. Yeah, this is another one that's a little, I can see where you'd go with a 2. The best answer is a 3, because that's clear evidence of a dangerous level of oppositional behavior, again, involving the threat of physical harm to others. That's the 3. He's clearly threatening physical harm to others. A 2 is evidence of oppositional or defiant behavior, which is currently interfering with the child's functioning in at least one life domain. Behavior causes emotional harm to others. So a 2 is more about the emotional harm. A 3 is about if he's physically threatening people. And that's what I mean about looking at these item definitions. There's sometimes these distinctions that really make a difference in what the answer, the best rating should be. Okay, danger to others. Okay, now you were saying 3s. Okay, it's actually a 2 because it's physically harmful aggression or dangerous fire setting, but not in the past 24 hours, or recent homicidal ideation. A 3 is acute homicidal ideation with a plan for physically harmful aggression or command hallucinations, or the child set a fire that placed others at significant risk of harm. So it's not that acute sense of we've got to do something right this very minute, but you definitely have to have him in a treatment setting where you are looking at. Now, if it's in the middle of a crisis and he is disrupting and this is happening right as you're rating the cans, a 3 would be fine because it's happening. It's the physically harmful aggression is happening. But we don't, and that's another thing. On this one, the 2, well, no, that's the fire setting, never mind. So the difference is the physically harmful aggression again, when it's happening. But again, look at the definitions and it really will help you with making a decision. The other thing is I tend to see that people are afraid to rate 3s on some of these items. Like this one, they think about danger to others, meaning like with a child who needs to be hospitalized. Remember, we're not using CANS as a mental health assessment. We're using the definitions we have here. If a clinician is doing the CANS and they want to use it in that way, they can. But for CSA, we don't. So you're looking at, you're not talking about, if you rate a 3, what you're saying is this child needs intervention immediately. There's something acute happening with the child. So it's not that now they may need acute psychiatric placement right away, but they may not. It's more about what's happening with the child, not where they need to go. So just keep that in mind. Okay, that was pretty good. All right, let's do, Anna, skip the next one and we'll go to, it's Alex. Yeah, here we go. Okay, this is a 10-year-old living with dad and stepmother. IEP states he has aggressive behavior and impulsivity hyperactivity. Stepmom Dawn thinks he is just, taking advantage of everybody, and she thinks his behavior is fake. And that way he gets a lot of attention and everybody's coddling him. She will not go to family therapy. They argue daily. He started being physically aggressive with his stepmother. And she's gotten to the point where she's saying, it's either him or me that's going to have to leave. So how would you rate Alex on living situation? Okay, we're getting a mix of 2s and 3s. 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. Good, good, 3, 3. One thing you have to do, and this is something that you can only do in real life, you can't do it when you're testing, is you have to kind of gauge whether or not the stepmom is really meaning that threat. It's just something she's saying because she's frustrated and she's venting, or is it a real threat that she's had it, this is it. If that's the case, it's going to be a 3 because the child is at immediate risk of leaving the household. That's the definition, due to his or her behaviors. So really the best answer is a 3. Again, in real life, you would probably want to talk and find out, get a little more information about, if this is really what she means or if she's venting. Okay, what about impulsivity and hyperactivity? Y'all are doing well. I didn't think people would do a 3 on that one. Okay, 2, 3, 2, 2, 2, 3. At least y'all aren't afraid to underrate, and you all aren't underrating. Okay, good, lots of 2s. Yeah, it's a 2 because there is evidence of a problem with impulsivity, distractibility, hyperactive behavior that interferes with the child's ability to function in at least one life domain. And the reason we know that is because it's on his IEP. He's been, quote, diagnosed. We don't know if a clinician diagnosed him or if it was just based on some testing, maybe someone did, but he's been determined to be impulsive or have hyperactivity. So it would be a 2. Doesn't really talk about that impulsivity, how it affects his behavior and being aggressive. So we don't go down that road. But again, in real life, you could do that and say, do you think his impulsivity is leading to his aggression? Okay, but then you have to be careful because you don't want to do that cause and effect. Okay, on the stepmother, how would she rate on the following items? Knowledge. How knowledgeable is she about this child's needs? Y'all are doing really well. Okay, come on. What about, yeah, okay. 3, 3. Okay. Best answer is a 3 because she has knowledge problems that place the child at risk of significant negative outcomes, meaning he would have to leave the home. Now, 2, which some of you are putting, is caregiver has a clear need for information to improve how knowledgeable he or she is about the child, and the lack of information is interfering with their ability to parent. So again, that's one of those where in real life, you would talk to the family, you would get a sense of, does she really believe all of this is a joke? He's just faking all of this, which, from what we know, that seems to be the truth. So it would be a 3. But that may not be actually what is happening. So again, it gets back to when you're rating in real life, you have the advantage of asking more questions or learning more information. And then the last one is involvement with care. Remember, she's saying she wants him out of the house. Good, you all are getting it. It's a 3. I think just almost everybody's putting a 3. And a 3 is the caregiver wishes for the child to be removed from his or her care or is not visiting the child in out-of-home care. So you really, it's, again, the worst it could be, a 3. She wants him out. Now, you could talk to the family, you could talk to the stepmom, and you could get a sense of whether or not she's really just frustrated, venting. She really, doesn't have a plan for him to leave the home. She hasn't thought about where he would go, anything like that. So she really is, either she really means it, which is a 3, or she doesn't, which might be a 2. Either way, what she's saying is what you have to look at, and all of the other things that about the aggression and that the daily arguing and things like that are bound to influence her behavior. So it's likely that she really does want him out of the house, but that's something you would want to verify. Okay, y'all are doing good. And I think I'm over time, but let's go on to the reports real quick, and then I'll let you talk some. Okay, I did want to touch on the reports in Canvas, on some of them anyway. If you are a case manager, I think the first one is the individual progress report. If you're a case manager that's entered at least one assessment for a child, you can pull up this report. And it compares a child's initial ratings to the 2 most recent assessments. It's really easy. And actually, I've done another set of slides where I show people exactly how to do it. But you can take the report, copy a domain, paste it into Excel, and create a chart. So that's what this report looks like. The initial one, and then the 2 most recent. And of course, this is a made up one. This isn't a real child. And you're looking at the life domain functioning and part of the child's strengths. Then go on to the next one on. And then see, all I did was copy that and paste it into Excel. And then you go to recommended charts, and it will create a chart for you. Where you're seeing nothing, where it's, it's the blue line is the initial. The first reassessment is the gray, and the green is the second reassessment. So if you're not seeing a line for one of those, it's because the rating was 0. So you can see how for hyperactivity, he started out as a 2, but now it's down to a 1. For depression, same thing. And again, this is a made up child. Now, neglect is consistently a 2, because if you look at the trauma items, then that's a historical one. The neglect is always there. But that's just to give you an idea of what you can do and looking at. There are other charts you can use. This is just a simple graph. And you can do a lot more if you are really familiar with Excel. I'll go on to the next one, Anna. Yeah. Same thing, a similar report called the permanency report is available on the DSS enhanced cans. Does the same thing, compares the initial cans to the 2 most recent. It is any caregiver that you've entered at least one assessment for, you can pull up the report. And so you can see it's actually organized. It's a more sophisticated report than the individual progress report. It's organized by the protective factors, which is a part of the Strengthening Families framework that DSS uses. And it will, like under safety, it'll have several items. Under concrete supports in time of need, it'll have several items. And then it will also show you which issues have, or which items have resolved over time. So they've gone from being something actionable, a 2 or a 3, down to a 0 or a 1. It'll also show you items requiring continued intervention, that sort of thing. Go on to the next one. I think I've got a screenshot of maybe. Nope. I wonder where it went. I thought I had a screenshot of the permanency report, but that's okay. So I've taken up more than my share of time. So thank you so much for participating with the ratings. I hope it made sense to you. If you have any questions, you can always email me, carol.wilson@csa.virginia, spelled out, .gov. But I am going to turn it over to Anna so she can get into service planning.
Zoom didn't apparently want me to unmute. If there are questions about specifically cans, rating the cans, any of the pieces that Carol covered, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them. I'm going to slide the chat over here, though, so that I don't get distracted by it while I'm talking to you all. So we are going to transition here and build upon what Carol trained on, specifically the cans. We're going to think about a general best practice framework for service planning, and then touch on how we utilize the cans to do that and how we bring the cans into the service planning process. So my opening statement to you all, and hopefully reminder, is that service planning is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done deal. as Carol showed us at the onset of the training, the code requires that service planning happen. Auditors, when they come out, look for evidence of the service plan, but best practice world is not that we complete the service plan, pat ourselves on the back, put it in the file, and take a deep breath to know that when the auditors come, they'll find evidence of it, right? Just like the CANs is intended to be the work, to be the sort of documentation of the work that you are doing with kids and families. Service plan is the work as well, right? It is not just a document that we do once and file away somewhere. As Carol told us, we can't develop a service plan without an assessment. I think about it through the language of the assessment is our foundation, right? I'm not an expert in home construction by any means, but the things that I know are that without a strong foundation, it really doesn't matter how fancy that house is that we build on top of it, right? We could use the most expensive shingles. We could use the most environmentally efficient windows. We could have the top of the line granite in the kitchen. It doesn't matter, right? If our builder doesn't lay the foundation evenly, if they cut corners, all the possible things that could happen, that this is where we exceed my knowledge of home construction. All of that we build on top won't be steady, right? The same thing with surface planning, right? If it doesn't matter how shiny, evidence-based, trauma-informed, what all of our buzzwords are in the treatment world, right, are the interventions that we put in place. If we don't have a strong assessment to guide us, if we're not making those decisions based off of strong data at the micro level, then how do we know that we're putting into place things that are going to be successful? For the purposes of today, the data we're really thinking about is the CANs, right? And utilizing the skills, resources, best practices that Carol talked to us about in terms of accurately rating the CANs. But I also encourage, from a sort of bigger CSA lens, to remember that there are other pieces of assessment information that help us have a strong foundation, right? There are assessments that your local agency may be required to do. There might be professional clinical assessments that have occurred, a biopsychosocial history. All of that is data. And then, of course, there's the voice of the youth and the family, right? What do they identify as their needs and their strengths? All of that information comes into our service planning process. The way that our assessment is a strong foundation is assuring that that information all speaks the same language, right? Do those pieces line up and look like the same kid and family system? The other piece about the strong foundation is I always like to remind folks about the piece that Carol said in the beginning, that the role of FAPT, right? FAPT is not intended to be a rubber stamping process. Our best practice in service planning is not that the service plan is filled out by the case manager in their office ahead of time and brought to FAPT for approval. Yes, there may be some pre-work that needs to happen, but the benefit, the strength of that multidisciplinary planning in the CSA world is that we're leveraging, that we're utilizing that expertise at the FAPT table. And it is really the job of FAPT, the role of FAPT, to develop that IFSP. And so utilizing the strengths of your team members is part of what makes it a strong foundation as well. So with that in mind, curious to hear from you all about how you go about your service planning, and wondering if strengths and the needs from the cans are what you utilize to guide service planning. No right or no judgment here. That's helpful to know. Y'all, just a couple more seconds to fill it out. All right, I am gonna end our poll. Here are the results. So I saw in channels and high fidelity wraparound language again. Celebration is that you all in Newport News, 84% say that you as an individual or you as a community utilize the strengths and the needs from the cans to guide service planning. So that is a celebration, and hopefully training this afternoon will give you more ideas on how you can further do that. So again, recognizing that everything in CSA, so that where it's a locally implemented process, right? And so there are distinct pieces of your structure in Newport News that that we here at OCS don't have the privilege of knowing all the details about. But when we deliver training on service planning, we deliver on the best practice structure and format. And the hope is that then you will utilize that structure as you implement the service planning process in Newport News. So the things that we talk about are the best practices. We hope that there are celebrations like just now of things that you can say, yeah, great, go us. We're already doing those things. And hopefully there are opportunities that come up to take pieces from today and further the work that you are doing. So the framework that when I think about service planning is that I think about it as our roadmap, right? We are on a journey with youth and families in the CSA process, and our service plan is our map to help us figure out how we get there. The service plan is not the treatment plan. So in my utilization review work I do here at OCS, I often see IFSPs, individual family service plans, that come where they really look like treatment plans. CSA isn't a treatment funding process, right? It's a service planning process. It's bigger than just treatment. So keeping that in mind as you are doing the work. I know there's lots of folks in this training today who have been to high fidelity wraparound training. So this should not look unfamiliar to you, right? This slide comes right out of wraparound training, actually, and applies very appropriately to CSA service planning as well, in that needs are not services. So when we are initiating our service planning process with kids and families, we want to be thinking about needs. The CANS sets us up beautifully for that, right? It's not, the CANS, as Carol told us, isn't about figuring out which service is needed. It's about identifying what are the needs of the youth and the family that we then are going to bring in to the service planning process. And then we'll talk a little bit about the strengths as well. But needs are not services, right? Needs, their needs cover lots of different life domains. Our CANS sets us up for that. Within the CANS, as Carol tells us, if it is represented on the CANS, then it is an item that can be brought into the service planning process. So if it is a need that is identified, then it is something that we can bring into service planning. The key about needs that we see a lot are two things. That one, we often forget Maslow, right, in our hierarchy of needs here. And so kids and families who come to us in CSA, they come to us with a significant amount of needs that they're eligible for CSA, right? And then their needs might be significant enough that we sort of feel like we need to put into place a high level of intervention. And so what we often do is we see those needs, those concerns, and we go right to that top of the pyramid, right? And we start thinking about sort of treatment services. And remembering what Maslow's tells us is that if those base of the pyramid needs aren't met, then sort of the same concept of that foundation of service planning, it doesn't matter about the evidence-based, the trauma-informed, all the things that we look for in a treatment intervention. It can't be successful, right? If those needs at the base of the pyramid aren't addressed. And again, the CAN sets us up for that, right? Because the CAN covers multiple life domains. It's not just looking at the social and emotional needs or the risk behaviors, right? But there are domains to cover those base of the pyramid. The other thing about needs versus services is that when we think about needs, we create space for conversation with kids and families, right? It specifically tends to play itself out with residential, right? A caregiver comes to CSA and they say that my child, my granddaughter, my nephew, whoever it is, needs residential, right? And immediately we go like this, we have feelings, we have thoughts, all the, and the caregiver as well, right? But when we can take a step back and think about it from a needs lens, we open the door for conversation, right? Because we might, if we're thinking about needs, then we're saying something like, what would be different if Anna went to residential, right? What would change? What would it look like? And then that caregiver has the space to have the conversation around taking locks off doors and being able to utilize a knife to cut vegetables and being able to remembering to take their medication on a daily basis because it would no longer need to be locked, and talking about being able to sleep through the night because there wouldn't be concerns about where Anna was going to end up that night. Right. And when we then have that conversation, if we all were together in the room somewhere not in the virtual world, I'd ask you, what's the need that Anna's caregiver is talking about here? And you all in unison would say safety. Right. And so then from the lens of safety, we can go into a conversation to facilitate service planning, right? Because there's lots of different ways to meet the need of safety. It might be residential. This isn't me sitting here saying that residential is bad, but residential is the service, right? Not the need. And the other piece for me about needs is that we all have them, right? And so in terms of an opportunity for engagement and in opening the door to conversation, needs feel less like a stigma, maybe would be the word, because we all have them. So remembering as we're initiating the service planning conversation with kids and families, that needs are not services, that our CANs helps us to have that conversation because we are identifying needs when we are rating the CANs. So when we are service planning, our goal is our destination, right? And this is probably not new to you all, especially those of you that have been doing the work for a long time. The goal is where we are headed. When we finish our journey with kids and families and CSA, where will they be? My reminder about the goal is that it is not the treatment goal, right? But it is the sort of global goal for the service planning process. A few examples for you here, right? These examples look at multiple life domains. They look at that long-term vision for where we are headed. I always give the example in my own life is that if I was planning a trip, my goal, my destination would be to see my sister who lives in California, right? And that's going to take me a long time to get from Richmond, Virginia. And she has a pretty sweet gig. She's a park ranger at Yosemite National Park. So it's not even like I'm driving to a big city, right? Once I even get to California, I got a lot of roads and small little places I got to navigate to get there. feels pretty similar to the work with kids and families, right? We know we were headed. It's going to take us a while to get there. There's lots of different turns, stops, maybe some pivots to get us there. So when we are service planning, because it takes us some time, the smaller trips, the smaller stops along the way are our objectives, right? And this is where we have the opportunity to bring in the cans. This is where we are looking at those twos and those threes, those actionable items, those needs that we have rated as needing action. That's what we are bringing in here as we are developing our objectives. I would encourage you to think about not just the twos and the threes for the youth, but the twos and the threes for the caregiver as well. And not just the caregiver when we're working with kids through the lens of DSS, but also when we're thinking about the kids who we are serving through CHINs, through the special education wraparound, sort of thinking about as it relates to the needs of the youth that we're bringing in to the service plan, what are the caregiver needs as well? And so when we're thinking about those objectives, as Carol said, sometimes we have to group them, right? We might have so many twos and threes that we group them together. And sometimes we have to prioritize. And so we might look at the ones that carry the most level of risk. We might also ask the youth and the family, where do they want to begin? Or where do they think they need to begin in terms of thinking about getting to our long-term goal? Where do we start? When we're developing our objectives, we're looking at removing the barriers that will help us get to our long-term goal. This is not the first time you are hearing about SMART objectives, right? I will not drag out your Friday afternoon with spending a large amount of time on SMART objectives, but rather just to remind you of the importance of developing objectives that are SMART, so that we are able to then because service planning is an ongoing process, when we develop objectives that are SMART, we can then come back and evaluate what's working, if it's working, how do we know, and where do we go from there? The other thing I will say about objectives, I see it in my in the UR that I do, is that objective development is not the time for our most advanced SAT vocabulary, right? All of those really SMART words that you have stored in your memory from the SATs or maybe from the New York Times crossword puzzle or however you use that vocabulary, not when we're developing our objectives, right? This is the time to be really concrete. Do not be afraid to use simple verbs like discuss, participate, demonstrate. The other thing is having one behavior at a time. Oftentimes I see in my UR that IFSPs have objectives that have multiple behaviors in them. It's really hard to figure out how and if we're being successful, and it's hard to know where to begin too. So one behavior, being concrete. The other thing that I will offer, it was in the handouts that we sent you, it was on like a PowerPoint slide, is that we have this really handy little formula, and some CSA communities have laminated that slide. And well, if you all are back to meeting in person, you could also put it up if families are participating still virtually for FAPT. You could put it up in the chat or something, but we have this formula. And so if you take a name and you add a verb and you add what and when and how measured, you will get a SMART objective. So name, John, will decrease, that's our verb, and what? His anxiety through engagement in in-home services, and when? At least 3 times a week for the next 3 months. And how will we measure it? by submitted documentation. We could play the same little game down there with Lee, right? So name plus verb plus what plus when plus how measured gets us a SMART objective. Again, that formula was in the handouts that the Crystal had sent out to you. But hopefully that is a helpful reminder when developing them. So we develop our objectives, right? And then that's the opportunity here when we can next think about services, right? So I'm headed to California. I decide that in my first leg of the journey, I can drive from Richmond to Abingdon. Again, or maybe not again, but to disclose, I'm not from Virginia. My geography may be totally off in terms of my direction, but I know it's west. So we're going to pretend like that's really an accurate statement. So from Richmond to Abingdon, I can go in one day, right? So that I have my objective that Anna and her family will drive from Richmond, Virginia to Abingdon, Virginia by March 19th, right? And so what do I need to get there, right? So the services that I'm going to need some gas, I'm going to need some caffeine, I'm going to need a rest stop, I'm going to need some games to keep my kids entertained, I'm going to need some snacks, right? I'm going to need some music, all kinds of things that I'm going to need to get me there. Same thing with kids and families, right? And the only thing that I would offer about services is to encourage thinking not just about the formal services that we pay for, but to also consider the informal supports, right? What is out there in the community and who are the in high fidelity wraparound language, natural supports that can be part of this service plan, part of the fuel to help the youth and the family get to their first stop, right? Their first objective. So when we are developing this service plan, we are making sure, these are our little practice check marks, that we are incorporating all of our assessment data, that we are utilizing strengths. We're going to talk about those in more detail here in just a moment. That we are looking at multiple life domains, remembering what Carol told us. If it's on the cans, it can be brought into service planning. Sometimes folks get real stuck thinking about CSA is really very focused just on treatment services, right? And the cans is much bigger than that. Making sure to that note that the service plan is conveying the complete picture of the youth and the family, right? We're not just looking at this one sliver of who they are. Our objectives are measurable, and we are including the voice of the youth and the family, right? Thinking about our system of care, youth and the family being at the center of that image, right? And so their voice should drive the work that we are doing. And we do not want to forget that hierarchy of needs, right? And starting with those needs. So strengths. Carol talked some about strengths and offered that I would talk about them some more. So here we are. We often think of strengths as things that people are good at, and things we're good at can be a strength for sure. But strengths are bigger than that. They're more than things that we are good at. They are things about us. They are people who we spend time with. They're the places we spend our time, the things we do with our time that give our life meaning, right? When I think of strengths, I think of what we are doing, who we are with, where we are when our light shines the brightest. So if you think about your own life, who are those people, right? Where are those places? What are those activities? Sometimes strengths are hidden, right? The kids and families who come to us at the CSA table, it's not because they are always at their best self in those moments, right? But even in sort of the moments where families and youth come to us in CSA, there can be moments in their day, even moments in the week when there is some light, or there have been times in their life when it wasn't always like this. And so strengths aren't just the things that are happening now also, right? They could be hidden under there. And so when I see a strength on the cans, in my UR lens, I'm always offering back to localities in a UR that I'm doing, like if it's a talent or interest for a youth, and I see that it's a 0 or a 1, I am writing back questions that I hope inspire the locality to become strengths detectives, right? I want to know who, well, first I want to know what that talent or interest is, right? Then I want to know who they enjoy doing it with, who taught it to them, when do they do it, where do they do it, have they ever had the opportunity to teach that to someone else, what do they want out of that strength, because those become the opportunities for the strengths to be what we call functional, right? It's not so much that Kevin likes basketball, right? But it's that Kevin grew up in a household of women, and Kevin had a older cousin who lived around the corner, who would pick him up on the weekends to let him escape that household of women and take him to the basketball court in the community, right? And then Kevin taught him to play basketball, and through Kevin's cousin taught him, I should use the same name all the time. Kevin's cousin taught him to play basketball. And through that relationship, Kevin met other males in the community. And then that got him connected to the local basketball league. And then Kevin went on to join the middle school team, and he was the point guard. And, the coach noticed that he was able to see the court and be able to deliver the ball to his teammates, and then we start to get some information. Right now we know about Kevin's cousin, and maybe we've learned about some other males who were in the community who could be strong resources for Kevin. And we learned that Kevin is a leader, right? Because he's the point guard and he's the one who's making sure that teammates get the ball. He's responsible for the plays. Now we have some really functional pieces of information that can be brought into the service plan. The other thing about strengths is I think about their value in discharge planning, right? We often talk about how discharge planning begins at the time that an intervention begins, right? Or we begin discharge planning at the time that we start service planning. But what does that really mean, right? Oftentimes in my UR lens, I see discharge will be discussed closer to, because I do UR for kids who are placed in residential. So I see on the service plan, discharge will be discussed closer to discharge date, right? So that to me thinks about like the services and the placement where the kid is going after they transition out of the residential placement. But discharge planning is so much more than that, right? To Carol's point, strengths being an opportunity to think about how this youth and family can live a life that they feel is enriched, and they are positive contributors to their community, that they have an improved relationship with each other. That I see is all part of discharge planning, and that is the opportunity to really build up strengths or build upon strengths. Oftentimes I think about it too with kids who might be out of the home for, they don't even have to be out of the home. Maybe they're in, I just don't see them if they're not out of the home, but they might be receiving services in the community. And I think about it through the lens of substance use, right? And there's always a goal related in substance use treatment related to developing a positive peer network or a positive support system. And that's really hard, right? That's not something that can just be done. And so I think about strengths as an opportunity maybe to do that, right? Because when we are engaged in something that is meaningful to us, when we are around others who share that same belief, we are our best selves, right? Our light shines the brightest. I'm a runner, have always been a runner. I don't love running because I'm particularly good at it. Someday if anyone ever wants to know more about it, we could get coffee and I can tell you all about why running is important to my life. But it is a strength for me. Again, not because I'm particularly good at it. I'm from the North. We moved down here for my husband to go to graduate school. We moved down here. We had a network of people naturally formed through him being in school. He graduated, people went on and got jobs in other places and moved away. And so we found ourselves still here, but without people. I am not someone who likes to just stay at home. Maybe you can tell with the energy with which I am talking, I'm not an introvert. I get my energy from interacting with others. So it was hard to be here alone. Got married, had baby, like, okay, he's going to go to daycare and this is where we'll meet other people, right? Because the daycare is near our community and we're all in this together. Those of you that have kids can appreciate that daycare is not the place to meet people, right? Because you're dropping off your baby and running to work and then you're picking up your baby and you're running home. So everybody was friendly and lovely, but it was like, hi, good morning, have a great day, enjoy your weekend, take care, love, those sorts of things. No real interaction in a meaningful way. And so then he went to preschool and we chose a preschool that aligned with values that were important to us. So it was like, all right, Abe's a little older now, like these are other people who share our values. So like, this is where it's going to happen. And yes, Abe made some friends. We had some of these like cute little parent and toddler preschooler play dates, but the preschool isn't in the community where we go to elementary school. So it was hard to keep those relationships going when life got bigger. And so he went on to elementary school. And I later learned that our elementary school is comprised of lots of people who grew up either in our community and returned, or at least like sort of in the Richmond world, maybe went to college, university in Virginia. And so made those relationships and came back. So it was hard to break into. Lots of women stay home. I don't. A little more self-disclosure for you all, we're Jewish, and so we don't go to church. They're another sort of opportunity for connection with people in the community. And so I kept like sort of trying to get in these doors and they weren't opening. I started going to this gym in our community. It was like sort of structured classes. And so I started going to the same class like in the early mornings and noticed the same women there. And over a period of months, I began to strike up conversations with them and learned through a relationship with one particular woman that I shared that I love to run. And she said, oh, well, there's this group of us who meet outside of the elementary school these couple days a week. You should join us. And so I went and I went to run with them. And then I see that these are women who I recognize from seeing at different events at the school. But, I don't know them. And so I start running with this group of women in February, and we're keeping this up for a while. But I'm still coming home and saying like, gosh, it's great. Like now I have people to exercise with and, Abe seems happy at school, but like, I want friends. Like when are we going to have friends? Fast forward to October and I came home from a run one morning and out of nowhere, it was super traumatic. Our dog passes away that morning. And I start texting these women sort of overwhelmed by the emotion and thinking about the logistics of how I'm going to tell my 3 kids and how I'm going to go to work and do all the things. And so we pick ourselves up and we get through the day. And that evening I'm at home putting dinner on the table for my kids, and there's a knock on our door. And I open it, and these women are standing on my doorstep with a bottle of wine for me and grief books for my kids. And it was at that moment that I realized that I did have friends, right? And that running, my strength, was the vehicle, the tool by which I developed those relationships, right? These are the same women whose doors I couldn't get into, or who I thought I couldn't find the connection with, right? But by doing something that gives my life value, by doing the thing that makes my light shine the brightest, those relationships happened organically. So my challenge to you in your service planning process with kids and families is to find the running for the youth and the families that you're working with, because it might be hidden, or it might not yet be developed. It might be a 2 or a 3, but there's an opportunity to grow it and to nurture it, and to do so by becoming strengths detectives. So strengths are functional, right? They're not just things. So we develop our service plan, and we go forth and we implement it. And then we come back to the FAP table and we revisit our plan. And when we are revisiting the plan, I hope that we are starting with celebrations, that we are naming the things that are going well, before we then begin to consider the other pieces of the puzzle, right? These are some questions you might consider. Again, the idea is not that you go forth and have to do every single one of these things, but the hope is that they are things that your team considers as you are reviewing the service plan. There is a 1-pager that we sent in the documents that includes sort of tips for service planning. And so some of these pieces are on that. And we're gathering the information that as we're revisiting this plan, we are gathering it from the documentation that we have. So documentation we're getting from our service providers that we might be utilizing, from the discussion that we're having at the FAP table, and from the voice of the youth and the family, right? And so after we revisit that plan, we are going to revise and we're going to update it. And as we're revising and we're updating it, this is where we're really looking at the cans again, right? So we are bringing in the actual cans, but also it's the opportunity to utilize those reports that Carol talked about, right? What is the data that we have from those individual reports, or from the permanency report as appropriate? And we are looking at, again, these are things that we might be considering, right? But we're looking at considering these questions specifically today, since we're talking about cans and service planning, about the cans, right? And utilizing answers to these questions to then update our objectives and reflect progress that aligns, and updating them to align with this new data that we've uncovered, right? As Carol said, our second and other subsequent cans may have more information because we've gotten to know the youth and the family more, right? We've developed a deeper rapport. Maybe services have been put into place that have uncovered additional needs. Maybe as we've moved along, we've met a need, right? Or we've uncovered strengths. And so we're bringing in this data as we develop new or update current objectives. A locality who I did UR for one thing I really liked on their IFSP was that they would have 3 different objectives in each IFSP, one for the youth, one for the family, like one the family developed, one the youth developed, and one that the team developed. And their IFSP would sort of keep a running update on those progress and then update them. And I thought that was a nice way to ensure that everyone's voice was brought into the process. So again, service planning is an ongoing process, right? It's not this one-time thing that we do, but each piece of the process builds upon itself. And I couldn't let the day end without just sort of bringing us back to the bigger picture, right? And thinking about the work that you're doing even at your micro level with the individual kids and families you work with as sort of a tool to improve your local system of care. And then of course, all of the local work feeding up to help us at the state level improve how our big system of care functions. But sort of these are questions that you all might wish to consider as a local team, as opportunities to sort of how are we, these questions sort of guiding the work, all of the work that we are doing at the local level, and how are we sort of putting those pieces together to help improve the way our whole local system of care serves kids and families, and how we work together as well. I got trigger happy there for a second. I specifically like the second to last bullet, because I think sometimes we forget about the strengths of all of the team members in our multidisciplinary process, and we get so focused on the youth and the family. Not that their voices and their strengths aren't important, but those of you that sit around the FACT and then up at the higher level, the CPMT table, those of you that are case managers and bring kids and families to FACT, those that supervise, you all have strengths and resources and knowledge, and how that is utilized to do the work is a really important part of the multidisciplinary process. So when we do those things, right, we get to this place of functioning as our vision of a true system of care. Carol, you always do this one, so would you like to do it? Carol, I lost you, but are you muted?
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yes, this is just something that some of you may get the emails from the PRAID website that they're called TCOM, Transitional Collaborative Outcomes Management, which is the name for all of the CANS tools and how they can be used to manage outcomes. But this was just something I thought was appropriate for us to kind of summarize what we've talked about. You're going to name whatever the needs are and the strengths. By identifying them, you're going to obtain it through their service planning process. The family is going to gain what they need, those skills and strengths, and then the community can sustain it. So it's going to, you can get out of the picture and you've got the community supports in place for the family. So it's just it was just sort of a neat summary, I thought, that would go with this training. I'm waiting for Anna to come up with a melody so we can sort of, sing it, but she hasn't done that yet.
So my comment about strengths would be that would not be an action step assigned to Anna. Music would not be my strength, but maybe we can find someone in the office whose strength that is. And
thank you all for your attention this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
I muted myself. I muted myself. And yet, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip this poll because it really sort of connects to this thing anyways. This, I think, is the more meaningful part. The poll is a way for us to interact with you. This is your takeaway. You don't have to put it in the chat. You don't have to tell it to us. You were gracious enough to spend 2 hours with us on an absolutely gorgeous Friday afternoon. So kudos to you all for being here. We want the time that you spent with us to be meaningful. So we're asked that you just take a moment to jot down for yourself. It can be for you as an individual. It could be your hope for you all as a community, but something as a result of what we offered to you today. What is something that you will start doing in terms of your work with the CANS and service planning? What is something you're going to change about the way that you do CANS and service planning, rate to utilize CANS and service planning? And then the third is a celebration. What's something that you learned that you individual, you as a community Newport News, do well? And that's something you're going to continue doing. So a start as a result of what we offered to you today, a change, and that I call the third a celebration, something you learned you're already doing well. And I'll take a moment to note that so that hopefully you utilize what we offered to you today. I know we are up against time here. There was a question, and Lisa, your follow-up might have indicated that it was answered, but I'm wondering, there's something, I'm wondering, at least I don't know, maybe you're a DSS person, I'm not sure, making an assumption based on this. The question was, oh, and Carol, this is where you might be helpful if it's DSS specific. Elaborating on bringing in strengths as part of protective capacity building. And yes, it was answered. Okay, great. Awesome. And I was thinking that that was a specific DSS term, it sounded like, but anyways, I'm glad it was answered.
Are you talking about something in the chat?
It came directly to me.
Oh, okay.
I think some people still can't ask questions to everybody.
Okay.
Full self-disclosure, you all are the first group that we have done this via Zoom. We typically use GoToWebinar, but GoToWebinar, we can't see you. It's like being on a radio show. We are talking into the abyss. So we thought, and you all can't interact in the chat. So we thought this might be a more user-friendly platform. Anyways, that brings us to the end of our time together. Again, thank you so much for your participation today. I'm going to put both of our email addresses in the chat. Oh boy, in case you, Carol, Wilson, I'm trying to type fast, which never works out well. In case you have additional questions or needs, feel free to reach out to us. If you didn't get the documents, Crystal can make sure that you get them. And we
absolutely, they can email me.
Wonderful weekend. Let us know how else we can help.
Got lots of things.